Where are most of our ancestors from?
Most of them are from the Netherlands on both sides of my family. Your grandpa's is more from England and Scotland, but I know my history. I know it best on my mom's side because we would have family reunions every 3 years with cousins from across the United States, and they would share stories about, it would be your great grandpa who came from the Netherlands.
Do you remember any of those stories?
Yes. One story that they wrote about was he wanted to become a minister in the Netherlands, but his dad wanted him to be a farmer, and instead he kind of left abruptly and came to the United States and worked around the country, worked in Texas for a time, but he went back to the Netherlands and married what would have been your great-great-great-grandmother, because they had been friends since they were children. But he married her, and the day after they got married, they came to the United States.
When about did they come to America?
1901.
1901. Like you said before, it was your, what was it?
It would be my great-great-grandpa.
Great.
He's your great-great-great.
What the differences between that he and his dad had, was that the reason that they came to America?
I don't know the background of that. As far as I know, he didn't go back. My great-great-grandmother did. After he died at a young age. He was only 42, so she did go back to the Netherlands, but I never heard that he did. I don't know that it was a family issue at all, but it was, you know, they had to work hard to take care of their family here, so, and then he died young, so.
Where did they first settle?
So they went to Maryland for a little while, and then ended up going out to Montana, to Bozeman. He worked on a farm there. He rented some land, but Canada was giving away free land to farmers, and that was a big draw. His brother-in-law was already there, and so they moved up to Canada. They had 4 children at that point, and then I think 4 more were born there. A couple children died young. One story was that they did surgery on a kitchen table for a ruptured appendix on one of their children, and she later died because it had already ruptured. But so they just did surgery on the kitchen table. I can't imagine that. But so they farmed up in Canada, but I don't really think he loved farming, but it was just what they were able to do. There were some Dutch people up there, like I said, his brother-in-law and a few other families, but it was Indian territory at that point. There weren't many white people around, and of course they didn't speak the language, so they had Sunday afternoon readings, so an itinerant minister would come around every once in a while, and they would have a church service. Otherwise they would just read sermons in Dutch with the other people that wanted to come. They wanted Christian schools for their kids, and there weren't any in Canada, so they moved back to Montana. There's a place called Church Hill, Manhattan, Montana, and that's kind of a big group of Dutch people lived there. So he did a little farming. He worked a grain business. He sold coal. He did a little of everything. By then, they had 10 surviving children, and I think they just worked to try to keep the family together. So, let's see.
Do you know, like, if they had any issues with the Native American people up there?
It didn't say so in this story that I read. It's just, you know, they were I think they kind of kept themselves separate. They talked about the western edge of the settlement, and that's where the Dutch people were. So I think just out of necessity, sort of they stayed together because they could understand each other and have a social life a little bit. So,
what religion did they practice?
Christian Reformed is what they were. It said my great-great-grandpa was a friend of the church. He didn't belong. So I don't know what that means, if he went along with his wife, and I don't know what he was going to be a minister of when at a young age he said he wanted to be a minister. But anyway, so they were Christian Reformed.
Right. What brought them to the state of Michigan from all the other places they stayed?
Well, like I said, my great-great-grandpa died at age 42, so my grandma was left with these kids, and some of them, were growing up and getting married themselves by the time the youngest ones were old enough. My grandpa, I think, was the fifth in line, and there were some wealthy families in the area, and because she was a widow, they said they would pay his tuition at Calvin College. So that's how my grandpa came to Michigan from Montana. But then the Depression hit, and so that funding for school dried up. He was going to be a lawyer, and he was a very smart guy. My grandpa wrote tons of articles that were in the Banner. He was very politically involved in Wyoming, Michigan, which is where they ended up settling. But anyway, while he was here, he did meet my grandma. She went to Davenport College, and her father was the president of Calvin Seminary. So that was a draw to get them in Michigan. He and my grandma moved to Montana for a short time, but there was no work. It was the Depression, so they came back here after they'd had a couple children. In fact, your grandma, Hoffman, was born in Montana. And then they came back here, and my grandma's parents, the Valbadas helped them financially, I think, a lot until they could get on their feet again.
Do you know, did your mom or her mom know Dutch? Did it get taught to you at all?
No, only a few words I feel benauwd. It's a word that doesn't have a direct translation. One of the things they did say in the stories was they didn't want, when they were living in Canada, they kept their kids out of school until they were 6 because they wanted to teach them Dutch at home, and that's what they spoke at home there. My grandma knew a few words, but not many. Again, just those little phrases that they know, but I didn't really ever hear them speak in Dutch to keep secrets from us kids. That I don't think they knew that much. So,
do you know what more recently, I would say, what they did for work, your uncles and aunts and stuff like that?
My grandpa, the one that married the lady from Michigan, the grandma from Michigan, he had a lumber business in Wyoming, and then in his later life, he was an insurance salesman. A lot of my grandpa's siblings who, grew up in Montana, they stayed either in the state of Washington, so they were farmers there. One of the Venheisens, which is their last name, he's a big potato farmer, and that potato farm is still going, even though that sibling has passed away. They have longhorn cattle out there, so a lot of them stayed kind of in the farming business. The women, a lot of them were teachers, and some of the family, we have still my mom's first cousins are kind of scattered all over the United States, but some still live in Bozeman. So,
did they have any food recipes passed down from where they were from to here?
Yeah, I would say pea soup is a big one that I love, which is kind of known to be Dutch. I don't know if banquet is really a Dutch thing, but we would have that every Christmas. And then something we called mouse, that was a Dutch. It was kale, potatoes, and a pork roast, and you cook that all together. So that was a pretty Dutch staple, I think. They were a very meat and potatoes kind of, you know, you ate what you had, and that's what you had. So. Soet and brei, which is barley and buttermilk. That was another thing I learned from my grandma, mostly my grandma on my dad's side, but those are some Dutch foods I remember.
Let's see. I think I can.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
can't
Mm-hmm.
It's a really good question.
Let's see if I have any other stories. Let's see.
Did you like know your great grandparents at all?
No. So the farthest I go back on this side is my grandparents. My grandpa's parents died before I was born, and then my grandparents on my grandma's side, or my great grandparents, I think I might have seen them once in my life, but I don't really remember it. And then, well, my grandma died, and then my grandpa remarried, and I think the family was kind of estranged from that stepmother. You know, they didn't really.
Did your grandpa like tell you any stories like of growing up in that?
You know, I wish I would have asked him more things. He was not in the war or anything, so I didn't have any stories like that to hear about. Most of the stories that I heard are from other cousins. My grandpa didn't talk a lot about being, what it was like being young. You know, my grandma, his wife, was kind of more upper class than he was. She tells me stories of playing with some kind of famous people in Grand Rapids. Like, she had a friend that was the baker of Baker Publishing, and you know, bigger names from around here. But you know, my grandpa could do some woodworking, but it's not like he had a huge workshop, but he would build a few things, you know. But I don't remember stories of when he was young, which it's too bad that I didn't ask more, you know.
Going back to like when they first like came to the U.S., do you know like if it was hard for them like starting out, like to get financially up there?
Yes, I think like I had always thought until I reread some of this that when you came to the United States, you had to be sponsored by someone. You couldn't just show up and hope for the best. But if they lived in Maryland for a while, I don't know that anyone there sponsored them, but I believe when they moved to Canada, they got that free land, and it was because, you know, my your great grandmother's brother was already there. So I think you kind of had to have someone that said, we're going to take care of them, just so the government didn't end up, you know, having to financially support you. I don't think there was anything like welfare. You know, farming was a good way you could get food for your family, for one thing, and have a cow for milk and butter, and that's the way it was. They had a horse that they got to town with. They didn't go to the store very much. I think it said 3 times a year they went to this bigger city that actually had a store. Otherwise, you had to supply what you needed day by day, but I don't know daily what that looked like for them, you know, like I'm sure they didn't have indoor plumbing or anything at first. I know it talked about one of those men up in Canada. He was a single guy and he lived in a place that he dug into the side of a wall. I can't remember the name of those kind of houses. They used them in South and North Dakota, it seems like a lot, like, and that's where he lived, but later he built a nice home. But that's how he started out, was just in a house in a hill, you know,
yeah,
with a door on it, and then probably freezing. I mean, in Canada, it would be really cold in the winter, and yeah. They said farming in Montana was easier because they had irrigation, I'm sure because of, like, I don't know, maybe the Yellowstone River. I don't know where they got their water, but it was easier. In Canada, they didn't have irrigation, and they said you could farm 160 acres by yourself fairly easily. You would only need help at harvest because you didn't have irrigation, so I guess your stuff didn't grow as good. You didn't have much to do, but 160 acres is a big farm,
yeah,
I think.
huge.
Yeah, so, but I again, I wish I had asked more questions, things that you wonder about when you're old, that the people are gone. You can't ask them anymore. Yeah.
So what, like, made you want to, like, stay in West Michigan? Was it, like, the family stuff, like the family history here, and just, like, or did you just want to stay here for the...
I think it's, I mean, it is family, not maybe family history, but I think, you know, most of our immediate family, I mean, my mom's brothers and sisters didn't stay around here. They have lived in various parts of the United States, but I think our family, you know, especially your grandpa's, is pretty solidly West Michigan, and I think it's a beautiful area. It, you know, we have a change of seasons, we have Lake Michigan, we have beautiful places to visit within Michigan, even though there are beautiful, I mean, I've been to Bozeman a couple of times and it's gorgeous. You know, to wake up and see the mountains all around you every day is amazing, but I think it's beautiful here, and our family's here now, and my work was here, Papa's work was here. You know, that's a big thing, even though we could have transported ourselves, I guess, anywhere with our jobs, but
do you know if we have any, like, living relatives still in the Netherlands, and, like, if so, would you go there to visit them?
I'm sure there are some, but I don't even know that uncles and aunts have gone back there to visit anyone. But I'm sure the Van Huysen name, and, you know, my maiden name was Wienstra. I'm sure there's some there. We're from Groningen in the Netherlands, I think, which is like a province, I think, or a state. I mean, you would compare it to something like that. And that's pretty, I think Dutch people are pretty attached to where they came from. You know, they take pride in a certain area. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a really big Dutch population in, like, West Michigan too,
Oh, yeah.
especially South Christian.
Right.
It's
yeah.
like all tall, blonde
Blonde.
Dutch kids.
Right.
It's crazy.
Right. People like you are
Well, it's
integrating. But your last name doesn't reflect your Dutchness, which I, you know, there are times when I think, oh, no one knows I'm Dutch, because you can say a name with a van in front of it and everybody knows you're Dutch, you know, but Shear is German. And so, but I like studying history and learning more about the past. There's a big historical center in the library at Calvin College, and my dad has sent lots of genealogy information there. So his, on the other side of my family, my dad's side, he goes way back in history, but I don't know as many of the stories of that side. That's why I concentrated on my mom's side of the family. So, because I know more stories. Do you think you would stay in West Michigan?
Like if I were you,
Yeah, I mean,
probably, you know, your mom's here. Yeah, like a lot of your family's here too, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I probably would just, you know, back then people didn't really like move like that,
Right.
like people do nowadays. But like now, once I got to like college, I would probably move
Yeah.
either out of state or like farther away from here. Not because I don't like it here, just because I want a change of like scenery and change of people. It's like people are different all around. Like you go from here to Detroit and it's like a whole nother almost culture.
Right.
Like it's not just one.
And I would say of my mom's generation, so she would be those were her grandparents that came from the United States or came to the United States. I would say 99% of them remained Christian Reformed. That was a big hold. The Christian schools and the Christian Reformed Church and that culture was very important to them. And I think in a good way and in a bad way, you know, that limits the contact you have with the world around you, because you know, if your child married a non-Dutch person, it was almost a sin, you know, and if you left the Christian Reformed Church, that was bad. But I think we've opened ourselves up to the rest of the world in a better way, that we can see there's value in a lot of other things, but you hate your culture to be watered down to a point where nobody remembers it, you know?
Yeah. That's good.
I think so.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah,
You did a good job.